Welcome to Safety Talk. Personal safety expert Pete Canavan shares his insights and interviews experts who provide simple and effective tips, techniques, and technologies to keep you safe and secure both online and off. Here's Pete.
Hello and welcome to Safety Talk. Hope all is going well in your life and that you're staying safe and secure. We've got another great episode for our listeners today, and we're going to talk with a woman named Lumen. She's going to share with us her scary experience with the hope that it'll help others who listen to this episode. Because you see, after surviving an unexpected attempt on her life, she realized that, there's brevity to life and the importance of not wasting it. Being miserable is really important. And she is now a transformational and empowerment speaker and has helped countless audiences to redefine their life experience and begin living their best life possible before it's too late. So before we get started, please take a minute and subscribe to Safety Talk on your favorite podcast network or our YouTube channel at safetytalkvideos.com. Don't miss an episode, and we appreciate you helping us spread the word and helping make this world a safer place. So it's my pleasure to welcome to Safety Talk today, Lumen. Welcome.
Hi, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. In preparing for the show today, I was humbled and honored, quite frankly, that you're willing to share your story, in order that it could help somebody else, because, these sorts of situations are something that's totally, typically unexpected. Maybe there are some warning signs or whatnot, but, you found yourself in a very unexpected situation. And so I really appreciate you, coming on and sharing some of that. So maybe it'll help, even just one person, it's worth it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was in a long-term relationship, and there was you mentioned maybe there were some signs, but we didn't have a physically abusive relationship or anything like that. It was just a relationship, as any relationship that is not going to survive the test of time. Some things that come to an end, and it was time for that relationship to come to an end. And I actually paid for him to go live with his family, which was 4 states away. And one Saturday night, a couple months later, there was a knock at my front door, and I opened it, and to my surprise, it was him. And that night changed my life forever.
So is it, you've given us a little background there, but, would you say that we all have, there are people that are in relationships where you find yourself sort of growing apart from the other person, right? As time goes on, like sometimes relationships get stronger over time. Sometimes relationships kind of just stay in a sort of a holding pattern, status quo, maybe because there are children involved, and maybe it's you stay together for the sake of the children, or you just find yourself growing apart because you realize that you've got different interests and things that you want to do in life, and the other person doesn't really hold the same sort of interests or want to do the same sorts of things. And unfortunately, we sometimes don't realize that in the beginning. Sometimes it takes some time. So how long were you together for prior, and were there children involved?
There were no children involved, and we were together for almost 12 years.
Okay,
And
so it's a while.
It was a while. So if there had been some sort of sign or inclination, I should have picked up on it over the course of nearly 12 years. And towards the end, we just had different views and different values. He was unemployed for the last 5 months of the relationship. It wasn't the first time he'd been unemployed, but this time he had become a full-blown alcoholic. And it's not the life I wanted to live. So it was time for the relationship to end.
Alcoholism is a very real and very strong, addiction for a lot of people. And unfortunately, yeah, I can see where alcoholism could, if that's where, somebody goes down that path, much as we think, oh, just don't drink. It's not that easy for someone that's an alcoholic, and it is a disease, and it's something that unfortunately, I guess you kind of saw that get worse and worse, and then it, I guess, kind of culminated, and you said, that's it, we need to end the relationship, and you did so thinking that it was over, but it wasn't.
right, because and he was not a violent drunk. He was like the sloppy 5-year-old drunk. So, it's like, okay, this is annoying and there's messes every it's just um so again, I didn't want to live my life like that. But because he was, this was somebody that I had cared for a long time, and he was down and out, and he wasn't doing anything to pull himself out of it. And so I couldn't, I would have felt guilty putting him on the street.
Sure.
So something I needed to do for myself was to make sure I didn't just kick him out with no place to go. And
Mm.
because I was financially responsible, I didn't feel like I could leave. So I one day I realized that I could actually pay for him to go and live with his mother.
And
So
that's
that's what
what
I
you
did.
did. And you said it was states away, a long way away, and
Yeah,
you
I was
thought
over a
that was
thousand
the end
miles
of it.
away.
So from the time that that he did leave and that you sent him away, how long before he came back and showed up at your house?
It was 2 months,
2 months
and
later?
within that period of time, this is somebody I was not afraid of. I knew he was struggling with the breakup because he just continually kept reaching out. And I was just like, no, no, we're done.
Mhm.
No, like I was not trying to initiate any contact with him, but I could tell he was struggling. And because of the alcoholism, that added another layer of struggle, of course. But it got to the point where I had to change my phone number. Um, I had asked for the landlord to change our locks, but there was no urgency in my mind to it. It was just kind of like, okay, well, yeah, I should probably change. I mean, I got the key back from him, but I should probably just change the locks just to be safe. And but there was no urgency to it, so it was no
Mm.
big deal. And honestly, when I saw he was at the door, it was like, what are you doing here? Like, but there was no fear of,
Right,
oh my gosh, I'm in danger. What's getting ready to happen? It was like, why are you here?
right, right. And it's not, obviously, so was it daytime, nighttime when he showed up?
It was around 6 o'clock at night on a Saturday in October.
Okay. So you go to the door, you see he's there, you're thinking, what the heck are you doing here? Not thinking anything of it other than why are you here? So you open up the door and
Exactly. I mean, if I had been afraid of him, I would have moved. I would have, made sure I wouldn't have just changed the locks. I would have moved had this been somebody I was afraid of. Again, if I had any fear, I never would have opened the door. Like
right, right.
it was very unexpected.
That's really gotta be so just shocking, right? I mean, because it's someone that you cared for, you loved, you trusted, you were together with them for over a decade, and then things change and not for the better, unfortunately. So, I mean, how does that affect someone, or you specifically, I suppose, but I guess in general, how you approach future relationships, right? I mean, that's got to have some sort of bearing on how you sort of vet people, right? Or check them out, or let your guard down. I mean, it's got to really affect a lot of things in terms of how you approach relationships in the future, I would think.
It does. It definitely had an impact on that. And, it takes the other person a little bit longer to earn my trust is
Mhm.
all. And, I make sure that in the beginning it's very, everything's very, very public. There's nothing to, you know, I don't say, come pick me up at my house and,
Good
not right
choice.
away or take me home. It's, meet in public places and possibly even group settings to start with. And then eventually, and as with any relationship, eventually the person does earn your trust.
Mhm.
But even though I have the past history that I do, any relationship really is kind of like that. In the beginning, you don't really it's not really a wise idea to just blatantly trust someone.
No, definitely not. And you're doing all the right things, meeting somebody in public and, making sure you're comfortable with them and spending a lot of time with them to get to know them, right? But there's still probably something always maybe gnawing in the back of your mind going, I hope this isn't another like nut, right? Or somebody that has, like an alter, another side to them, like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of thing where, I mean, we've seen numerous cases over the years where a charming, attractive man was able to easily, seduce women and then, rape and kill them, and
Right.
it's happened, Ted Bundy was one of the most famous instances, right? But it's happened to other people where they could be well groomed, well mannered, polite, say all the right things. You're thinking, wow, this is like Mr. Right. Yeah, everything is looking good. But, and maybe it will be, right? I mean,
Right.
there's nothing that says that it's not going to be. But I think, once that sort of trust has been broken by somebody that we're close to, that's got to still, be something that can weigh heavily from time to time. And it's something that I don't know. I mean, how is it just a matter of getting to know the person more and more and then arming yourself with the fact that, you know what, this has happened to me once before. I kind of know what maybe hopefully to look for in case it ever happens again? Or is it just you sort of go on until they maybe give you a, hopefully never, but something that would be like a red flag, I guess.
Well, that's because he had no history of violence or anything. My ex, that is, there were no signs to look
Right.
for, and a lot of situations that we hear about are similar to mine. There are no signs,
Mhm.
and they are, and and unfortunately, I think have you ever seen that show Snapped?
I have not. I know of it, but
Right. So I think what happened is when it was just my personal opinion is that for him, my ex, that it was just too much change all at once, and he didn't know what else to do with his life, and that he just snapped
in snap.
basically. And you can't foresee that. You can't predict that. And
Right.
so it's just a matter of, do you feel safe with the person that you're with? And but there can always be signs, and I'm sure some level of my subconscious is probably always looking at this point now.
Yeah, and it's just because it's a part of your history, it's a part of your experience, I mean, everybody deserves to feel safe, and when you experience a situation where you thought you were safe or maybe just that you weren't in jeopardy, right?
Right.
And then find all of a sudden you're not safe and that you are in peril or jeopardy or that like I said, that trust issue with people going forward has got to be something that is can be difficult to deal with. But you have to do what you can to keep yourself safe. And if you know somebody, law enforcement runs some background checks on them, right? It's like, okay, who is this person? Do they have any speeding tickets? Do they have any arrests? Any felonies I got to worry about?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we can't all do that all the time, right? But hopefully, the people we meet are, and for the most part, most people are good people, right? I mean, it's just
Mhm.
unfortunately, you never know. It could be something that just that straw that breaks the camel's back, so as the saying goes, right? It's just something that a series of bad situations, bad experiences, can culminate, and so being able to have some wherewithal, some awareness, some means of protecting ourselves is important. One of the things that you and I talked about briefly before we started here is, as you recently, about a year ago, started taking martial arts, started taking jujitsu as a
Mhm.
way to help. And that's been sort of therapeutic for you. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because obviously that's a huge interest of mine, because that's what I do a lot of times.
Yeah, it took a while for me to get to the point where I was ready to put myself into those positions, because as you know, with martial arts, a lot of it, it's very physical contact.
Hmm.
And he had me in the house for 3.5 hours, and there were multiple strangulations. There were some punches and stuff. Like it just
It's
it was
unbelievable.
an attack. It
Hmm.
was an attempt on my life. At one point, I did. Um, he had me pinned up against the door with both hands, choking me out, and my feet were dangling, and I could see the blue and gold doormat beneath my feet. And I really thought that that was the last thing I was going to see, because I could see my crumpled body on that blue and gold doormat.
Oh my
Um,
God.
so that was at the end of the evening. But prior to that, there were other physical attacks on it. And so to go through jujitsu and put myself through that, there are a lot of chokeholds in
Yes.
jujitsu. Uh, and there were some positions that were the exact same way he had me. But I was already determined to work through all of that. Not just to get the skill, but to work through. That was the last piece, really, of that traumatic event that I really needed to mentally and emotionally work through. And it was very transforming. And I'm a completely different person than I was a year ago, having gone through it. And I am stronger. And um, but I'm also now skilled with, if anybody comes up to me and I don't feel safe, then now I have the knowledge of at least what to do. And, by practicing and keeping those skills together, then it just makes you feel like you're a little more protected and safe because you can defend yourself.
Sure. I mean, it
And
takes your confidence level up. But I mean, like you said, you can be in some of the same sort of positions you found yourself in, which can be very triggering. I had someone
mhm,
on the show recently, and they work with women who've been abused. And one of the things they do is they make sure that they are very conscious of how they're touching and grabbing and stuff like that, because something could be a trigger and all of a sudden it sets you off because it puts you maybe right back to that time when you were fighting for your life, or you thought maybe this is it, and
mhm.
that's a really obviously traumatic thing. So to be able to work through that, I mean, I give you so much credit because you're a very strong woman to be able to do that, because it does put you back there to a certain extent, and you've got to push through it. But then once you have some of that experience, and you're like, well, okay, now I know how to deal with it if it were to happen again. And you give yourself some measure of knowledge and skills. It gives you some of that, some confidence. Now, a year of training, you're not Bruce Lee, but you know, it still gives you something that you didn't have before. And that's the bottom line, right? Is at least have something. I do women's self-defense seminars, and some of the times they're only 2 hours, 3 hours long, and you can't really do a whole lot in that time. But what you can do is try to change the mindset, right, from victim to a warrior. I talk about having the warrior mindset, right? No matter what's in your way, you got to go over, under, through, or around that obstacle, whether it's a person, whether it's a situation, whether it's anything that sits in your way, and it could be personal, that could be in your business, in dealing with anything, right? Because we all have obstacles that we have to deal with, and we can't just give up, right? You can't just give up. You've got to really push through. And in a self-defense situation, when you're fighting for your life, you got to go from nice Jay to you shouldn't have messed with me, Tigress Jay, right? And but that's hard for people to do, right? Especially if they haven't had any experience with it. So the training that you're doing is great because it's giving you some of that knowledge and experience to be able to do that. I mean, I know you don't normally talk about this sort of thing, so we appreciate it. But you're helping educate other people on how to protect themselves ultimately. Um, Now, you had mentioned some other things that I thought were very interesting, and some of it I hadn't heard about before. As you mentioned, you've changed your phone number and address, and you've done some things to keep yourself protected. But tell us a little bit about some of those programs. Like you mentioned something, a confidential address program. What is that?
So after that night, I made sure I pressed charges and everything like that. And I made sure to follow up, and he ended up going to prison. But within that process, I was informed by the state that if I didn't feel safe, which I didn't,
Mhm.
they have, and most states have a confidential address program, which is a program that when you have been attacked. It's definitely geared more towards domestic violence situations, but when you even a situation like mine that is not quite domestic violence, but kind of falls under that umbrella, but I did not feel safe from my attacker. Um, so there's most states again have confidential address programs where they can suppress your address. They're usually through the attorney general's office, and so you get um, a central address, and then there's usually a unique number that says this is this person's mail, and then you have all of your mail go to this one address, and then they will forward it to the only like they're the only ones that have the address on file for you. And unless you give out your actual address, then nobody else knows where you live. And
Interesting.
there's other, if you don't go through that route, if you haven't experienced anything that qualifies you for that program, there's mail forwarding services. You don't have to have your mail come to your physical address.
Nah,
Um,
UPS store, right? That's
yeah,
I've had
exactly.
I've had a UPS box for my business forever because it used to be mailboxes, etc. before it became the UPS store. But I mean, I didn't do it as a way to be, privacy, but it was a way to have my mail sent somewhere when I wasn't home or to have packages dropped off when I wasn't around, with a home-based business. They're like my employees. It's amazing. They're signing for your packages. I can drop things off and they ship them and mail them. But yes, there's definitely some easy ways to do that without having to go through that whole the attorney general and all of that kind of stuff if you don't need to. But that's interesting. And you also mentioned DMV record suppression through the motor vehicles, Department of Motor Vehicles at your state. That's a similar sort of thing, or how does that work?
Yeah, and every state has kind of their different way of protecting their I don't want to say victims, but the people enrolled in their program.
Mhm.
There's so each state is a little different, and there's because I've moved around a little bit, I'm familiar with some of the different states, and there's some of them do have where they will suppress your DMV records because that's another way that people can find you
Mhm.
is by doing a DMV search.
So if someone has your name and some other information, they do a record search, it'll just come up like X'd out or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
That's really good to know because people there are people that have been victims of domestic violence or some sort of other crime, and they want to be able to feel a little bit safer. So that's absolutely a way that people could help to add that another layer, right? I mean, every layer that we put in our circle of sort of safety, right? We have you can have, if you have multiple layers, it's almost like like your castle is you, right? And then you got a moat around it, a layer of protection, And if you have several moats, then that way you're that much more protected because there's all these different layers that someone would have to try to get through in order to get to you, to find you, etc.
Mhm.
It's just interesting. I'd never heard of those programs. So thank you for sharing because I'm sure there are people out there that are going, wow, I'm gonna have to look into that. Um,
Right. Because I'd never heard of it. I never had a need to have heard of it. But because I went through what I did, and that's another reason why I was wanted to talk with you today, is because there are programs out there, there are things out there where I needed to feel like I could continue to live my life and feel safe and not scared. Because what he did was so unexpected, then I didn't know what to think. And so, like we were just talking about the levels of protection. And so I needed to make sure that I was able to continue to live my life freely, but also feel protected, like I was safe.
sure, and we all deserve to be safe, but not maybe everybody is. Every woman I think should take a self-defense course, and a refresher once in a while. And I'm not just saying that because I teach them, but because it's something that women need to feel at least somewhat confident that if somebody tries to accost them, they have some, at least some cursory knowledge of being, of knowing what to do to give themselves a chance of surviving or escaping. It all starts with awareness, obviously, so hopefully you don't get into the situation in the first place and you can spot those warning signs from someone. Sometimes you can't spot them, right?
Right.
But at least being aware of the people around you, the places you're at, the positions you're in, the objects around you, and not in a paranoia state. I mean, people are like, oh, it's kind of like you're paranoid. No, it's called prepared, not paranoid. And if you're prepared, it doesn't matter what the situation is. It could be in business, could be in life, could be in self-defense, whatever. If you're prepared, that's going to make you more relaxed because now you know what to do if something is going to happen. It's not like you live in a constant state of paranoia and you're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, someone's going to get me. No, that's not what it's about. It's like, okay, I'm going into a restaurant. I'm going into a bar. I'm going into the supermarket. I'm going to the movie theater. Where am I? Where are the exits? There's one there. There's one there. If something were to happen, what would I do? Great. Okay, sit down, watch my movie. Right? Something happens,
Right.
you've already thought about it ahead of time. And if we've thought about things ahead of time, and thought about how we would react to them, then when it actually occurs, there's no decision making process that we have to make because we've already made the decision. So instead of sitting going, oh my God, what should I do? We've already thought about what we're going to do. And so we do it. And so those seconds count, those milliseconds count. And it could be the difference between, surviving or, not being injured and something worse occurring. And so that's what I try to stress all the time in my classes is, it's not that you're learning how to fight. It's that you're developing a certain mindset, you're developing a certain confidence, you're developing a certain sense of awareness and understanding, spotting people, spotting cues, right? If you're talking to somebody and they're getting agitated and all of a sudden their voice is going faster and they're getting louder and it's getting higher pitched, right? That should be an indicator, right? If they're sitting there clenching their fists or they're squirming or they're agitated. I mean, there's all kinds of subtle clues that if you understand what to look for, then when you see them, you go, oh, that's not good, right? And so we can make those decisions. One of the things that you had talked about, again in our initial before we got started here, something called imposter syndrome, and I think a lot of people have heard the term, but may not be familiar with what it is. So maybe if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to explain what that is and what that means for our listeners.
Imposter syndrome it's basically a fancy word for self-doubt. It's feeling like you're not good enough, or it's feeling like you have to do everything yourself, or you have to take on everything, or maybe you feel like if you can't pick up a skill right away, that you're not good enough. And there's everything just kind of roots back to self-doubt. We a lot of times we hear the word perfectionist or perfectionism, and that's actually a type of imposter syndrome, is because it has to be perfect before you do anything. And that's actually I don't feel like I had imposter syndrome, but I definitely, when I was trying to get out of the relationship, I definitely felt like I needed to have the perfect plan of how I was going to handle my finances and what I was going to do with him, because I couldn't put him on the street, but what was I going to do? And so I did stay in the situation for a while, which was just frustrating and miserable.
Hmm.
But I needed the perfect plan. And so I thought about it, and I've since learned that thinking about things is not going to do anything. You have to take action. And, it ties back to jujitsu kind of. You can't just, if you get into a position, you can't just sit there and think about it, or you're going to get tapped out, or, whatever. You have to take action. You have to move. You have to think quick on your feet. And you have to, that's the only way you're going to get through is by taking action.
No, and that's absolutely so true because, a lot of times, whether it's in business or in life, we feel like everything's got to be perfect, or, we're kind of not, or we're an imposter, right? We're saying we're an expert, or we're saying we know something, but we don't. No, just get started. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to learn. Know that things are never going to be perfect, right? They're never going to be perfect in business. They're never going to be perfect in a relationship. They're never going to be perfect in jujitsu or martial arts or whatever. A situation is never going to be perfect, right? And it's funny because I say this all the time in my classes. Someone will say, "Well, but I don't know if I can do that, or I can't do this," or "Oh, wait, I didn't do that right," and I just go, "Bad guy, don't care." Bad guy don't
Yeah.
care. The bad guy doesn't care, but I'd say it like that. Bad guy don't care, right? Because if they're grabbing you a certain way and you move a certain way and it's not exactly how I showed you, who cares?
Right. Did you
Do
get out?
something. Right. Do something, and don't stop doing something until you're able to escape or diffuse a situation, et cetera. So don't, and so I think imposter syndrome really, it can be applied to so many different things in life because sometimes, we feel like, oh, I'm an expert. I'm speaking on stage. Am I really qualified for this? Well, yeah, that's why you're doing it, right? Don't doubt yourself. And I think that's great how you tied that back in, Jay, to self-doubt, because I think a lot of it has to do with that doubt, right? We're not sure that we're able to perform whatever on stage or in business or relationship or martial arts or whatever. And we have to be perfect. No, you don't have to be perfect. Nothing's ever perfect. The technique you do that comes out so beautiful when you're doing it on the mat in a controlled environment with a uniform on is totally going to be different than when you're outside on the ground, slippery, in the rain, street clothes, heels, right? I mean, it's totally different. And I think that's a big fallacy that a lot of people don't think about as much. And that's one of the things that I talk about in my programs is, look, you have a certain environment when you're training a lot of times, and then you have another environment where things can actually go down. Low lighting situation versus nice bright light in a dojo, right? So there's different things that you need to practice in order to help yourself at least become familiar with different, scenarios and situations so that all of a sudden it's not so black and white, like, wait, I've been practicing like this, but now I need to apply it and it's totally different. That's not good. And so that's where if we just practice a little bit and expose ourselves to different scenarios and situations and experiences, it's only going to benefit us going forward, and it'll get rid of that self-doubt, right? And that's really that's so important, because what happens when you doubt yourself? You hesitate. If you hesitate, depending on how you're hesitating, could be the difference between you escaping or getting hurt or killed, right? So, specifically with regard to what we've been talking about here. So, very, very good, very good. That's appreciate
And
it.
when you just continuing on that line of thought, when you try something, if it doesn't work, you've at least altered the situation just enough
Mhm.
that maybe something new will pop up or you'll have a new idea or a new thought. And so not just, on the mat, but in life in general, is if you take an action and it doesn't work, well, that doesn't mean that you're incapable or you can't. It just means that didn't work.
Right.
So try something else, especially if you're trying to get from point A to point B because it's something that you want. If you want to be a speaker speaking on stage and you get on stage and you try something and it doesn't really work out that great, okay, well, that didn't work. So now you learn, you readjust, and you try again. And eventually, you will find your way through. You'll find the way through that obstacle. You'll find your way to the goal that you're trying to achieve. You will eventually get there. You just have to be willing to try and make some mistakes.
And as long as you learn from those mistakes, that's the bottom line. Nobody
Exactly.
ever learned anything doing it right the first time.
No.
You don't learn anything. You learn by making mistakes. And like you just said, if you do something a certain way and it doesn't work, so what? Learn from it, do it differently. If you don't learn and you keep doing the same thing over and over again, well, now that's not smart, right? Now you're not learning from that. Thomas Edison, what is it? He tried 1,000 different ways of or more of trying to get a light bulb to work. He never said any single one of them was a failure. I just discovered another way that didn't work. I mean, what kind of unbelievable attitude is that to have when we're approaching a problem? I mean, how many people would have had the perseverance to try something over 1,000 times when it just didn't work, didn't work, didn't work, didn't work? Most people would just say, to heck with it. It is not going to happen. But we can't give up, especially, in certain situations, right? And that's so critical. And so I want to talk a little bit about how what you're doing now, because you've now become a speaker. You talk about transformation, you talk about empowerment. Your situation has really helped mold you now into helping other people. So tell us a little bit about what you do there.
Well, because of that night, I mentioned earlier that it changed my life forever. And a lot of times that happens in life where somebody has a life altering event. It could be a trauma like mine, it could be a terminal illness diagnosis, a tragedy, a loss. People have life altering events all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually when something like that happens. And it was the case with me, that you become aware of the brevity of life. And it's like, oh, if I had actually lost my life that night, I wasn't happy fully in my life.
Mm.
And there were still some things that I was waiting to change. Like I had gotten out of the relationship, but I was also in a job that I hated. But I had convinced myself that I'll just keep this job until my lease runs out and then I'll start planning my life. I'd solved half the problem. I decided to suck it up and tolerate the other half. But had I lost my life that night, I wasn't happy. I wasn't living the life that I would have wanted. And so that from that point on, that was the silver lining that came out of that was, okay, I had the balls to get out of the relationship and then I did nothing.
Mm.
I quit. And so it was like, nope, okay, from now on, you're going to live your life the way you want to and make the best of it that you can. And it's
Yeah,
unfortunate.
unfortunately, it took, that sort of experience to make you come to that realization, right? To kind of get that clarity and say, what's going on here, right? And most people don't ever have that happen, thank God, to them, right? Where it sort of comes, maybe in a, people that have had, an illness that was really, terrible and they've overcome that and kind of really anybody that's gotten a second lease on life, right? It could just be, you decided not to get on that airplane and that airplane crashed and everybody died. Why weren't you on that airplane? Right? You unfortunately a lot of air crashes lately, but but it makes you wonder, like, okay, well, why am I still here? Is there a bigger sense for me? Do I have a bigger purpose in life? And having that moment of clarity occur, however it happens, whether it's from a tragedy of maybe somebody that we know that was close to us, or an illness, or a life altering event like that you experience, those are moments when it gives us the chance to transform. It gives us the chance to say, you know what? What am I waiting for? Right? What am I waiting for? Why am I settling? I've only got one life to live. And at the end of it, do I want to, sit back and say, man, I tackled every possible thing I could as hard as I could and did the best I could, and not have regrets? Or, are we going to be, there at death's door saying, I woulda, coulda, shoulda. I wish I had. I don't want to do that. I know I'm trying to do as much as I can in the time I have and try to make a difference with people. And it sounds like, and you're doing the same thing, through uh, your speaking. And so that's what you have this thing called the unknown bucket list. So tell us a little bit about that. I'm gonna pull it up on the screen for those that are watching. But what is the unknown bucket list?
Well, we all, as you were just talking about, there's people that have kind of this, they become aware that they really need to focus on living the best life that they can because we only get one. But most people are like me before who I was before that night. And there was no sense of urgency. There was no sense of my life can end at any moment because there was nothing pressing that I needed to deal with. And so my goal is for people who feel stuck, who are wanting to, like I said earlier, wanting to go from point A to point B, and they want something more in life. Maybe they want something bigger or better or different. That don't wait until you have that life altering event. Don't wait until something happens because when something happens, it might be the last time and it takes you out.
Mm.
So the urgency is actually now. And so I teach people how to, my biggest problem was when I was trying to figure out how to get out of the relationship and out of the job and how to change my life, I didn't even know where to begin. And there's a lot of information out there, but I was not in that world. So I was not looking for information. I was not looking for somebody to help me. And I thought I had to figure it out all on my own. I was silent about being as miserable in my life as I was, because when I compared my life to somebody else, and that's a big issue with a lot of people as well, is we compare ourselves. But by comparison, my life wasn't that bad.
Hmm.
There were certainly other things that could have been happening in the relationship that would have been way worse. So, did I really have to get out of the relationship? And the bottom line is yes, because it's my life and I was miserable. So, my goal is to show people how to find the clarity on what it is that they want in life and how to live a life that's authentically true to them, especially if they've kind of lost their way, and how to find the self-confidence to get over those obstacles that we were just talking about.
That's awesome, because I have it up on the screen here, and if people are listening to this, you can always go to theunknownbucketlist.com and see what Jay has here, because it's exactly what you just said. If maybe you're kind of stuck in a rut, you're not quite sure how to maximize your life, you're not really happy with things. We all have the power to do this. Sometimes we don't have the courage to. And it does take courage. You might feel like you're trapped, as you say on your website, for a variety of reasons, right? Guilt, doubt, whatever the circumstances are, maybe because you're trapped in a job, you've got bills you got to pay, you're not quite sure how to make that change, if you hate it. But you help people feel like they can make that change and make it feel like it is possible. And she has a free self-assessment tool called Resume Your Life. I like that. Because the important thing is, and as you put it here, it helps you discover what makes you happy, what makes, as you put it, your heart smile. And maybe rediscover things that you forgot about, that are important to you. And I think, when we're kids, it's easy, right? We all have these great dreams of what we want to be, right? A policeman, a fireman, an astronaut, a doctor, or whatever, right? And then as we get older, a lot of times we put the things that we were passionate about and that we had initially, wanted to try to do, we put them on a back burner, and sometimes we forget about them because, we're told, oh, you can't do that. You got to go to school. You got to do this. You got to get a job. You got to go to college. You got to, and so we a lot of times settle. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this sounds almost like an anti-settle thing. That Resume Your Life, right?
It is, and it's a play on words. Actually, it's you can either call it resume your life or resume your life, and I like to say it's a resume of your life to resume the life you want.
Oh, okay. There we go. Yes, because this is also a resume. Yes.
Yeah, because it's just looking back at like you were just talking about. We have hopes and dreams, and I like to say that if you don't move, life will move you.
Very true.
And it's because, we have dreams when we were a kid, and then we grow up and we become an adult, and life happens. And if we don't proactively move, and if we just kind of like go with the flow because society says this is how life is supposed to happen, you graduate high school, you get a job, you get a spouse, you get a house, you have some kids, like societies or even cultural or familial, there are a number of influences that kind of dictate how life goes. And to stand up against that and say, that's not really working for me. And I want to go do this because I don't mean to point to that, but I want to live my life a little differently because that's going to be authentic to me and who I am. And at the end of the day, your life is yours, because no friends, no family, no society, no culture, nothing like that is going to be around. Eventually, all of that will go away. and it's just you and your life. And so it really no matter how much time you have, it has to be the one that is really authentic to your core.
I love it. Would you, and I can hear some people right now saying, um, not literally, but I know supposedly listen to this, some people are probably saying, well, hey, it's too late for me, right? I'm in my 60s
Mm-mm.
or I'm in my 70s. And it's like, you know what? My life is my life. And, I've just kind of resigned myself to it. I hear this sometimes from older people, like, I'm set in my ways and I'm not going to change, right? And, it upsets me when I hear that because life is a journey, right? It's not a destination. We should always be learning. We should always be growing. We should always be experiencing new things. And you can make a change at any point in your life. It doesn't matter if you're 5 years old or 85 years old. There's nothing that says you can't change to improve your happiness. We deserve to be happy. We deserve um, to go after the things that are important to us. And too many people settle, and when you settle, then you're not happy anymore, right? The fire goes out, the passion goes out, that flame sort of dies down or gets extinguished. And then we all become robots. You get up, you get ready for work, you go to work, you do your job, you come home, you have dinner, you watch the news, maybe you watch a little TV, you go to bed, you do it all over again. You live for the weekend. What do you do on the weekend? Maybe you go out, maybe have some drinks, hang out with some friends. But the bottom line is you get kind of stuck in a routine, and that routine can become a rut. And
Yes.
I hate routines because they lead to complacency. And when we're complacent, we just keep expecting things to always be the same. And from a safety standpoint, that's bad too. But in a life standpoint, it's terrible. And so pursue the things that you're passionate about and maybe rekindle those interests and those sparks. And I love that the unknown bucket list, because maybe it is unknown. Maybe you're not quite sure what that bucket list looks like. We all know what the term means, bucket list, but I like how you put the spin on the unknown bucket list, because maybe we're not quite sure. But what you're doing is you're helping people kind of figure out what that is so that they can live their best life, right?
Well, and so the unknown part of the unknown bucket list is that it's the bucket list of life that you've already been living, because we all have overlooked accomplishments and achievements that we don't give ourselves credit for.
True.
There are things that happen in our life that just pop up and happen, and we dismiss as insignificant because it wasn't like this huge, we most people have a bucket list, or at least have heard of the concept. And it usually involves like skydiving or going to Africa on a safari, or going to
Mhm.
travel some exotic place overseas. Uh, and that's great, but that's also kind of going back to what society decides is a bucket list and what should be on it. And life happens unexpected, unplanned, and random multiple times throughout the day. And things pop up spontaneous, like, okay, well, I don't have time to deal with this. And so you quickly deal with whatever issue just popped up and you go on about your business. Well, now you've proven to yourself that you can be spontaneous, you can think quickly, you're a problem solver, and you probably didn't even stop to give yourself credit for all of those things. And so it's about reminding ourselves of all of the things that we have done in our life.
You got to
And
celebrate
so
the little wins, right? It's not just the big wins.
exactly. And there's a story I used to say last year that I was visiting some friends and we cut into a watermelon and it was yellow.
Interesting.
Right. And like that's not a significant event, but I'd never seen a yellow watermelon. Neither had any of them. We had to go down a rabbit hole of researching, like, is it rotten? Is it like, but yellow watermelons exist. Well, I could have gone my entire life and never known that a yellow watermelon existed, but
Well,
it
thanks to you, we
happened.
all do now.
Yeah, well, but it's little things like that that I mean, like, and they, these mini moments accumulate in your life, and then you can supersize the amount of life that you are having. And there's have you ever done something for the first time and it absolutely changed your life, like a sport or a hobby or something?
Oh, sure.
Well, you wouldn't have known to put it on your bucket list until you did it.
Right.
So it's kind of that.
No, I
There's
like that.
multiple functions to the concept.
Sure. Yeah, no, and you know, I think the problem is we just get so consumed by the day to day that
Mhm.
it's hard for us to celebrate those little wins because maybe we're too focused on the big ones. I mean, like I say, every day I'm living the dream and the occasional nightmare. Because, I mean, you live the best life that you can, but there's always going to be challenges and curveballs that get thrown in your way, and you deal with them and then you move on. I mean, being in IT, I've got many clients and, my phone could ring in 2 minutes and it's going to be a client with a major problem and I got to go deal with that. And I will. And it's what I do day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. It's, there's an issue, customer calls, you take care of it, and you can't give up. You figure out ways to do it. And believe me, there's many a times where I'm the one caught in the middle. I got the hardware company pointing at me saying, "Oh, it's the software," and the software company pointing at the hardware company saying, "No, it's the hardware." And there's Pete stuck in the middle, figuring it out. And it happens many, many times. But you know what? You have to deal with it. You can't give up. I never give up. I mean, I'm persistent to a fault. My wife would probably say, because if there's something I want to do, I'm going to stay at it until I figure it out, whatever it is, whether it's something I want to do, something I want to accomplish, anything I want to achieve. We've heard of goal boards. I have a goal board. Everybody should have a vision board or a goal board where you put those things on there that are important to you. It doesn't have to be a big fancy house and a fancy car and a lot of money. It could be, small things, right? Maybe you need a new computer. Maybe you need something for your yard. Like you can put anything on that, but things that are going to make you happy, right? Things that are going to impact your life in a positive way that don't have to be earth shattering, right? They just need to make you feel good and know that you're doing the best that you can and celebrate, like we said, celebrate those little wins because they happen all the time.
They do. And like to what you were just talking about, there's like when you're frustrated about being in the middle. There's because life is both good and bad. The bad stuff goes on the unknown bucket list too. And it's not something that, we would ever want to happen, but it serves as a way to remind us that we can handle bad stuff. We can get through hard things. We can get through the obstacles so that when the next one pops up, we've kind of built a resilience towards it. And it's like, okay, you know what? It's been good days for the last couple weeks, and now it's all right. So today is going to be a challenging day, but I can get through it because I've done it before.
Exactly. And tomorrow's another day.
Tomorrow's another day, and it'll be full of unknown, unplanned, and unexpected events.
Yeah, yes. Life's always throwing curveballs at us. So Jay, we're coming to the end of the show already. I mean, crank out an hour, it always goes by so quickly. Really appreciate you coming on. Do you have any last thoughts or anything you want to leave the audience with here as we wrap?
One thing I want to leave specifically your audience with is one of the things that I struggled with in the beginning because I felt like I was lying when I would give a different name. But as far as it relates to safety, if you go into, let's say, a coffee shop and or a restaurant even, and they're like, okay, and what's the name for the order? Well, one way that you can also feel safe is give them a different name.
Sure.
Don't give them your name. You can give them a version of your name, or you can give them your nickname, or you can, something that you'll remember that you told them. But it's just another level of protection of feeling safe because you never know who's listening. And then some random stranger could walk up to you and be like, oh, hey, don't you remember me from, way back when or whatever like that.
Right, right.
And
Great
I
point.
did have to get over the feeling initially of feeling guilty, like, oh my gosh, I'm lying. Somebody's going to find me out. And it almost ties to that imposter syndrome, like, oh, I'm so faking it right now. But
Yeah, but the person at
once
the
you get,
Starbucks counter is not asking for your ID. You just say,
no,
give me a name for the coffee.
nobody's gonna know except for you. And if you're like once you get comfortable with it, then you'll just be like, okay, yeah, whatever, and then you can have fun with it. But it's just another tip that I wanted to leave with your audience as far as safety goes.
No, I think that's very, very relevant and very important. I appreciate you sharing that because, like you said, you could be using your name for an order. They call out your name. It could be the restaurant, it could be a coffee shop, it could be wherever. But maybe that person hears it and now they come up to you later and it's like, "Hey, Pete, don't you remember me? Hey, Jay, don't you remember me? Yeah, it's so and so. We met, a long time ago. You probably don't remember me." And you're going, I don't remember you, right? But maybe I should. So
Right.
that
And
prevents that
we're
from
so
happening.
nice that we probably are like, oh, I can't hurt this person's feelings and be like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't remember you.
Hmm.
Although I would say, no, I'm sorry, I don't remember you.
No, well, and that's see, you just hit on something else, and we go down a whole nother rabbit hole with this, but um, we often are afraid of hurting someone's feelings.
Hmm.
Right? And if you're in a situation where you're uncomfortable, maybe you just get a weird feeling about something, you just get a strange, sensation, hair in the back of your neck stands up, you're about to get in an elevator and something just doesn't seem right about the guy that's in there or the person that's in there. Um, you know, but you're thinking, I'm probably just being silly. I'll get it anyway. I don't want to hurt their feelings. They don't know you. You don't know them. Who cares if they're hurting their feelings? It's better to be safe,
Yeah.
right? I've mentioned The Gift of Fear before that book. If anybody has read that, if they haven't, go get it. Gavin DeBecker, unbelievable book, and it talks about how we have this gift of fear, right? And we should use it and we should listen to it because almost always it's going to be right. Don't worry about offending somebody. And I think that's what one of the big problems with society today is, and it's impacting our personal safety, is we're afraid to what we think is going to be offensive to somebody else. If we would just worry about ourselves and stop worrying about everybody else, it would go so much further today. And so I really like that tip, Jay. And anybody can use it. Guys, girls, it doesn't matter. Use an alias in the restaurant, whatever. Like, hey, Mister. You know, uh, you can put some kind of funny names to it, and see how far they'll go with it. You almost make a game out of it. Lucifer, table for two. Just. But I mean, I'm not saying use that, but what I'm saying, like, you can have some fun with it. You know what I mean? And,
Yeah.
and it's just something that you can do, and adds a little fun to life, but it also more importantly adds a safety aspect and a sort of another moat around our identity and our helps us stay a little safer. So
Yeah.
appreciate it. So basically, to sum it up, just so our audience knows here as we're wrapping, that basically you've taken your past experiences, you've used that now to help others you know, find confidence and clarity and resilience really in their own lives when they have challenges to overcome, or if they, suffer from, that aforementioned imposter syndrome. And you do that through this unknown bucket list and you're speaking, right?
Yes.
All right. So if people want to get a hold of you, they can go to theunknownbucketlist.com, right? And
Yes.
get your info. And when I post this up on our YouTube channel, we'll make sure we have the links below to you. And really appreciate you coming on. So, did I miss anything?
No, I think you covered it perfectly. And I'm appreciative of you letting me come on and speak to your audience today.
Absolutely, really appreciate it. So again, if you're interested in learning more about Jay Lumen, and you can reach out to her on Instagram, TikTok, Linktree. Links will be on her website there, theunknownbucketlist.com, and we will post them. So thanks so much to you for being here, and thanks to our listeners for tuning into Safety Talk. Again, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get the latest safety information and share with your circles so we can help make this world a safer place. And in the meantime, everybody, thank you so much and stay safe.